Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. So I'm making this video specifically for this DOGE agency we're seeing apparently being brought in by Elon Musk. First of all, it's named after the Doge coin. It's an acronym standing for Department of Government Efficiency, I think. Their ostensible mandate, and again, this is kind of being rolled out as, oh, they're going to have a function in the administration. They may, insofar as they advise Donald Trump directly, but it's my understanding they're not going to be cabinet members or anything, so they're not going to require confirmation. So they're effectively presidential advisors. Now, that said, it looks like they're going to be advisors that are going to have President Trump's ear pretty well. They're going to be folks he's going to listen to rather carefully, sort of to paraphrase the film Gangs of New York, where they say, oh, the scammer horns didn't run the city, but they were listened to quite carefully by those that did. I could see a scenario like this sort of playing out with this DOGE thing. Exactly what it looks like remains to be seen, but I expect Elon Musk and Mr. Ramaswamy are going to have at least some level of attention and consideration from Mr. Trump in terms of cutting things. And again, budget cuts, I think, are in the offing in the United States, if for no other reason than there seems to be issues with the underlying deficit. That said, it's something that I think is worthwhile to bring to DOGE's attention is USCIS redundancy in the U.S. family immigration context. What are we talking about here? Well, specifically, I'm talking about fiancé visas, marriage visas, so the K-1 fiancé visa, K-3 marriage visa, not so much in use as it once was, but then the standard spousal immigrant visas like the IR-1 and the CR-1 visa. So let me explain the redundancy. USCIS goes through a prolonged process of doing a background check and basically adjudicating a petition for a K-1, a K-3, a CR-1, or an IR-1 visa, and then they send it off to, depending on the visa category, now actually not depending on the visa category, they send it off to National Visa Center, and then depending on the visa category, for example, K-1 and K-3 applications generally get routed directly to the U.S. Embassy where the interview will take place, and then they go ahead and process paperwork. Otherwise, immigrant spouse visas go to the National Visa Center where paperwork is processed through their online portal. The point I'm trying to make with regard to this, though, is it's redundant. USCIS goes through a series of functions that then Department of State, either the embassy or the National Visa Center, basically does all over again. The Department of State, I don't know who's adding what or what the appropriate, how do you handle this, but again, if they're visas where the family member of an American citizen or lawful permanent resident is outside of the country, they're going to have to deal with an embassy anyway. Why not just make that whole process occur at the embassy? Why have all of this stuff where it goes through USCIS only to then go to an embassy to do the exact same thing over again? I don't know how many times I've heard from clients over the years, especially when we're dealing with the National Visa Center, and that's its own neo-Soviet digital hell, but leave that aside. Every time we're dealing with them, I get this from clients where they say, what are we doing here? We've handed all of this in. We've given them all of this stuff. Oftentimes, the only exception to that will be financial documentation pertaining to one's ability to support a fiancé or a spouse in the United States. That will be the only extra documentation that will be handed over to Department of State compared to the documentation that's been handed over to the Department of Homeland Security. Why do we have two different cabinet level departments handling this? And why are they doing functionally the same thing? Again, it's redundant. So something, and before DOGE goes, so to sort of forestall what I can imagine being the defense on this is for DOGE. So just have a look out, Ms. Elon, have a look out, Vivek, for this argument. If you do come after USCIS in this context, they'll turn back around and say, well, what's it matter anyway? We're self-funded. We're funded through the fees that people pay to us. Well, guess what? They're not. Because as we've seen, their government effectively, they go over budget. They don't have enough resources to do what their mandate requires. So periodically, they go cap in hand back to Congress to request money even though they're self-funded. But they use the self-funded excuse anytime anybody starts poking around saying, hey, could you do this more efficiently, they'll fire back with, oh, we're self-funded, we don't need to, we can do what we want because, the taxpayer isn't paying for it. Hey, if you get that defense, just look at the past, look at the history. Every now and again, they usually let it build up to quite a deficit, but every now and again, they come showing back up to Congress, cap in hand, looking for taxpayer money. So no, they are not self-funded. Then on top of that, they oftentimes take money to not even process cases. I've discussed the most sickening case I've seen recently, which has just had another recent development in it, which is even worse than anything I saw in the case before that. So I take issue with the notion that they're self-funded by taking these funds to do their job, because I've seen cases where they just take the money and don't do what they're supposed to do. At the same time, overall, in a more broader sense, in terms of their funding, yeah, okay, they take fees for the processing fees, but as I've talked about, they go cap in hand all the time back to Congress looking for our taxpayer money to fill the shortfall. So effectively, yes, they are taxpayer funded. But the thing to take away from this video is, look, these folks are paying in. They're paying a filing fee to do something that is redundant on a level that is really absurd. It goes through once, it goes through USCIS, and then effectively it goes back through Department of State to go back through the same function. Say what you will about the first term of Trump and say what you will about Tillerson, a lot to be said there, but the idea of consolidating all of this, especially in a family-based context, again, fiancés and spouses of U.S. citizens, consolidating all of this and just having it all occur at embassies abroad, I think would be much better than the current highly redundant, highly inefficient, highly expensive system that really gets the taxpayer coming and going if they use the system at all. Because they get the taxpayer coming because they go cap in hand all the time for taxpayer money from Congress. Then they get the taxpayer again because if he wants to bring his foreign fiancé or spouse into the United States, he's got to pay filing fees. And then he's paying filing fees on a wildly redundant system. So hopefully, DOGE, you will go ahead and look at this situation and hopefully figure out a plan to not only make this more efficient in terms of cost efficiency, but also make it more efficient in terms of time. Because right now, like a fiancé visa can take as long as 14 months. I'm seeing marriage visas taking 18, 20, 24 months to process. And again, what is being added by USCIS, or conversely, what is being added by Department of State? Department of State is, at the end of the day, responsible for adjudicating the final interview on these cases. So fine, I see what their ultimate function is. Why not just have them do everything and take that burden off of USCIS and make that operation more efficient, less redundant overall, and less of a drag on the American taxpayer?